I am delighted to have Lavinia Plonka with us today. She's a body language expert who helped people improve their movement for over 35 years. She works with movement, behavior, relationships, and careers. Her unique expertise connects the dots between posture, movement, emotions, and the mind. Welcome, Lavinia. I am so excited to have this opportunity to speak with you at length today. We hardly ever get this amount of time together.
Thank you, Martha. Actually, I think it's the first time that I'm speaking with you from this end.
Exactly. So this is great. I'm excited about your topic, and you've talked about waking up to awareness through movement as an agent of transformation. And I'd like to just hand it to you to begin, maybe from where your life brought you into this work, or wherever you want to start today.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people, when they hear the words the Feldenkrais method or have had an experience with the Feldenkrais method, there's a tendency to associate it with, I'm just so much more flexible, or it really helped my shoulder, or I'm walking better, kind of looking at compartmentalized improvements that are generally connected with aspects of physiologic function. And Moshe Feldenkrais developed the method because he felt that by learning to learn and developing awareness, you wouldn't just improve how you move, you would improve everything about your life. He was the one who really thought of his method as an agent for transformation. And I can speak for myself. I went into it for the same obvious reasons. I had back pain. And after my first lesson, which wasn't even a class, I took an excerpt out of one of his books. My back pain felt better. And then after the first live lesson I did, it was gone. And I thought, this is a miracle. What's that about? But as I continued studying this work, I began to realize that there were subtle shifts taking place in the way I acted, in the way I thought, in the way I organized my life, so that this kind of crazy, chaotic, extremely anxious performer, that I was many, many years ago, turned into someone that was, just more capable, calmer, more able to focus, and really more on track for living the kind of life that I had kind of dreamed of. And that was when I realized that this work works on you, that by understanding how I move, I begin to understand how I move through my life. And so that's kind of why I shifted and began to dedicate my life to, not just the Feldenkrais method was a great beginning for me, and I'm absolutely committed to it, but Moshe himself was, as you know, he studied everything, and he brought everything into his work. And so I also have continued to explore, based on the inspirations from his own work, other avenues to try to understand how all of these different somatic disciplines begin to help us move better, feel better, act better, and again, as he put it, live our avowed and unavowed dreams.
I love that language. It's really quite poetic. My question to you now is, it sounds like an evolution, like there's really a process. And maybe for many people, it's fine to sort of begin with the body, but then where does it go? Could you talk more about what you mean by transformational process or transformation, and just what your evolution has been with it?
Well, I don't know if you're old enough to remember. I say that a lot these days, but back before there was such a thing as the internet and everybody watched TV and there were television commercials, there was an anti-drug commercial that was on TV that showed an egg, and it said, "This is your brain," and then they showed a scrambled egg, and it said, "This is your brain on drugs." And so it was trying to be like that. What happens is when you take drugs, you're scrambled. And I have often thought of that because I think that sometimes when people do this work, there's this process of scrambling, this process of, oh, I never thought of it that way, or now my shoulder doesn't move the way it did before, or I'm staggering all over the floor, and then something happens and it becomes an omelet. So, in order to become an omelet, you have to scramble your eggs. And that is a kind of transformation, a very simple transformation. When we think about the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly, there's this period where it's in the chrysalis, where it turns into juice. It just disintegrates, and then it emerges as this glorious butterfly. So for me, the idea of using Feldenkrais awareness through movement as an agent for transformation is saying that I am willing to be in the unknown. I am willing to explore novelty and interrupt my habitual patterns that keep me the caterpillar that I've always been, and explore other possibilities. I know that we all at this point, especially the shift audience, knows that we're just a gathering of particles. You could say I'm mostly water, you could say I'm mostly space. I'm organizing myself to be the person that you're seeing today. And with movement and the use of awareness through movement, I have an opportunity to see how I am making my shape, how I am creating my reality, in essence, through the way I perceive myself, or as Feldenkrais put it, my self-image. Not my self-image like self-esteem, but literally, where's my shoulders? How do I walk? Understanding myself in that way is a transformational process, so that I have choice, right? I can choose how I want to be instead of only being exactly the same way as I was programmed to be from my childhood and my education and my career or whatever it is. I have choice. I have agency.
Thank you for that. I've heard the word autogenic a lot affiliated with the Feldenkrais method. I'm also interested in the emotional side of all of this. I know you work with that. I wondered if you might bring in something about either of those.
Well, again, it comes back to this attitude that people have that our physical actions are in some way separate from our emotional life and separate from our intellectual life. And Feldenkrais said that it's all going on all at the same time. He called it the 4 components of action, right? Thinking, feeling, sensing, and moving, all going on at the same time, right? I love this movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, because it sort of tells us that we're experiencing multiple realities at the same time. And sometimes my thinking is not coordinating with my feelings, or my posture is not congruent with the way I'm moving through my life. And when I bring it all together, it's more like being a unified human being. And when, I came to the Feldenkrais method from the theater, which was all about emotion, and even more about, body language, because my primary way of making a living as a performer was as a mime. So a mime is somebody who, we don't just get trapped in invisible boxes, but we take stories and create characters without words, just through the body. So my interest was already there in sort of how do emotions happen? As a performer, it was really easy for me to take on a body language of someone sad or someone angry, or express a certain kind of emotion, but I didn't know why I was taking those postures. I didn't understand why these would be universal. It would, I didn't know there was a science behind it. And when I started to do Feldenkrais lessons, and there's so many, there's a thousand, I guess, and I would be doing a movement and I'd be like, oh, this makes me feel a certain way. When I reach with my chest forward, it's very different than when I reach with my chest back. And what's the connection between flexion and extension? How do I reach? Then the question became, what do my hands do? What's my face doing? And I started to see that the lessons themselves contained hints of a deeper understanding of our own emotional vocabulary. And so that set me off on a whole study of emotion science and researching into all the different methods that are looking at how we could use somatic approaches to understanding our emotions. And I've been slowly but surely integrating them in with awareness through movement lessons, because of course, to me, awareness through movement lessons are just such a wonderful base for anything. If you're a Tai Chi practitioner, it can help your Tai Chi. If you're a ballerina, it can help your, it can help anything if you just look at it through the lens of what it is you're interested in. So for me, what's that saying? If you're a hammer, the whole world is a nail. So for me, the emotions have always been the most interesting thing, because as you know, if my emotional life is toxic, then my body's going to feel toxic. If my emotional life is satisfying, then I'm more relaxed in my body, and vice versa, right? It's a chicken or egg kind of thing. If I'm in an emotional turmoil, I'm not going to be able to think clearly. So once I bring all the parts together and unify myself, then I'm more able to, be the person that I intended to be. Right? We all have these dreams of who we want to be when we grow up, what kind of a person I want to be, and then 50 years later we go, oh, forgot to do that, right? Got caught up in my habits. So this work is an opportunity for me to regain my birthright, to be the person that I want it to be.
Really self agency and autonomy, all these kinds of senses of just being with ourselves. That's so powerful. And I believe there's another strand that is very important in your work, which is the sacred. I wondered if you might want to just sort of tell us about how you weave that in.
There's so many different ways. Again, Feldenkrais was a deep student of Zen and Japanese martial arts and the Gurdjieff work. And he understood a lot about yoga. A lot of the lessons actually lead to different asanas. So he wove these principles into his work. And I've always been interested, I grew up Catholic. Ritual, there's all these rituals that we had, that bowing and kneeling and genuflecting and all that stuff. And, you feel something. And then when I started studying yoga back when I was in college, and you would be in these different postures, these different positions, opening yourself up to different experiences, I could feel that there's something more to what's happening in the body. I'm not going to go so far as to say, oh, I'm connecting with something. I don't know, because I can't verify it. But there's a different sensation in oneself, a different quality of life in oneself. And so I went into a whole other, even looking at the tarot, which is not exactly sacred, but it's occult. And if you look at tarot cards that have been illustrated through the centuries, the figures all have different postures. You look at Hindu statuary, you look at the Greeks, the postures and the attitudes, the Egyptians all had certain positions that had to do with either evoking or invoking certain kinds of energy in oneself. And then I'd go back to awareness through movement and find a lesson that speaks to that in a very clear and concrete way. And so over the years, I've played with that aspect in different ways. I've done workshops on, connecting Feldenkrais awareness through movement lessons with the chakras, with the tarot, with just exploring sacred prayer movements from different traditions. And I think it's a way to bring an avenue of deeper understanding and connection for people, even people who have been involved in that particular spiritual discipline for many years, to suddenly I mean, if you just take something as simple as sitting in half lotus or sitting in zazen, and how important it is to be able to feel the verticality of the spine and the organization of the pelvis in front of the sits bones, not on the sits bones, but in front, so that I have this. And so many people can't sit in meditation postures, or they can't find an erect spine. Are they missing something? It's a question. And what happens when suddenly you feel like, whoa, I'm able to sit like this, and it's easy, and it's changed my breathing, and it's changed the orientation of my head. And suddenly I feel more quiet than when I did when I was sitting like this and struggling with the tension in my shoulders. So to me, there's a very practical aspect to the work with different sacred postures and movements. And then there's perhaps a more esoteric one that I'm still exploring, because I am no expert when it comes to that. To me, I'm a perennial student.
I'm intrigued, and a lot of what you're sharing reminds me of the archetypes.
My favorite subjects.
That's what I was wondering. It's just like taking on different postures that are more personal, but then relating them, as you're describing, through the statues, through the tarot, to these more typical processes. Yeah, if you want to speak more to that, that'd be interesting.
Well, there are so many archetypes. I mean, I think Carolyn Mace listed like over 300 archetypes. And those, if you look at the idea from emotional language, right? Whether it's Paul Ekman, or it's the emotional body, or anything, they all basically boil down to between 6 and 9 basic emotions that they have identified. I think the rasas, the Indian way, is 9, right? So between 6 and 9 basic emotions. But then you think about the hundreds and hundreds of mixed emotions we have, the nuances, between just pure anger and just a little bit of contempt, right? All of this, there's hundreds of different emotions. So then when you think about the archetypes, are there meta archetypes? Are there like we have this basic emotions? Do we have archetypes where we can say, okay, these are the basics, and then we can expand from there? And in my research, I found that there are 4 that really struck me. I'm sure there are many more, but there are 4 that I feel maybe they're not the most basic, but they represent what I would like to see in the world, what I would like to be in the world. And they were actually, my study of this was inspired by the work of Angeles Arian. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but yeah, she's awesome. And she wrote a book called The Fourfold Way, which looked at 4 archetypes: the warrior, the teacher, the visionary, and the healer. And so then I became interested in, well, where is their physical center? Where does each of these move from? And, it almost seems like, as Feldenkrais would call it, the elusive obvious, that the warrior would be grounded in the pelvis, that they would be rooted and ready for action, that they would have that deep connection to being able to activate the psoas to stand and fight or to do what's necessary, that the teacher is grounded in the chest, the heart, the solar plexus, being able to listen, being able to respond, being able to be compassionate and have empathy, and that the healer, of course, is in the hands and the power we have in our hands, and that the visionaries is in the eyes and our ability to have hindsight, foresight, insight, And so I, again, did the same thing. I went through the whole canon of Feldenkrais lessons and went, what are the ones that speak to these archetypes? And then once you explore that, you can see how you could spin off into countless mixed types. The Madonna archetype, what is she? She's a combination of the softness of the chest with a little bit of vision. You can just go on and on like that, mixing them together once you have an understanding of those 4 basics. So, yeah, I love the idea that movement can be applied to anything in your life. And my personal passion of exploring mythology and traditions and religion, and then seeing how that's working now with all of the neuroscience that's coming out, that's so exciting to me to see that they actually have scientific evidence that your posture affects your mood, affects your health. We intuited that, but now we have proof.
Yeah, we've been knowing it, right, in a certain way, in that known wisdom of sharing life stories across maybe a community of 20 practitioners, then 500, then 1,000, or then across disciplines. I mean, that's one of the things I'm loving about our somatic field and the somatic movement field, is that as we get a little past the divisions of different styles of somatic movement, we find our commonalities. And there's this process of qualitative research, of case study, that is confirming our knowledge. And then to also have this quantitative, sometimes more reductionistic science come in and find ways to take this complex work and validate it. Wow, we're pretty lucky that we're in that stage of our lives right now where that can happen.
Yeah, and I agree with you that, so much of what we experience and teach is not quantifiably measurable. It doesn't necessarily connect with a kind of the Descartesian approach to proving something. And when science doesn't want to accept anecdotal or stories, as you put it, as evidence, it puts our work in a kind of a quandary, because everyone in our culture loves to say, I'm bringing an evidence-based process for you to be able to experience, or a research-driven. And, the research comes from you. One of my teachers once said with a Feldenkrais lesson, you are the experiment, you are the experimenter, and you are the laboratory. It's all about me. It's all about me, Martha. But it is, when I'm in my experience, it's my experience. And then I learn how to take it out into the world.
There's so many things I want to ask you now. One goes back to, first of all, shout out to Angeles Arian again. I had the great honor of being kind of the movement person in a 2-day workshop she was leading. So I got to co-work with her and collaborate. As a matter of fact, she got stuck on a plane, and so she was late. And you're going to love this. She basically said, someone said, well, Martha's here, should she start? And she goes, I've never met her, but she's a dancer, so I know we can trust her. So something about the archetype of the dancer, maybe not the performer dancer, but the dancer shaman dancer that just dances from spirit. Those are people, she felt, that you can just trust. You don't need to know, because they're showing their emotions right out front. Speaking of that, I want to get back to archetypes and mythology, actually. The notion of Jung working with archetypes, Carl Jung. And then you mentioned that Moshe worked with sort of these 4 principles. They are very close to the Jungian ones of sensing, feeling, intuiting. And the 4th, I'm forgetting right now, but you'll help me. So sensing, thinking.
Well, yeah.
Letting go of thinking.
Moshe was sensing, feeling, moving, and thinking.
So intuiting and moving, that's kind of interesting to me. We in the Laban work relate intuiting to timing, like where, when is the right moment. So I'm just, and I could imagine that might relate to moving too, but just curious if Jung kind of comes up for you, or any other of your teachers that you haven't named, but you've mentioned Angeles. Anybody else that's really influenced you in this?
Well, like Feldenkrais, I have been very influenced by the teachings of Gurdjieff, who also spoke about moving, thinking, sensing. he spoke about it as having three brains. And for a while there was a triune brain theory going on, but he wrote about it back at the turn of the 20th century, which is so interesting. And he also spoke a lot about our habitual postures and how our habits interfere with our ability to live a full life. So there's certainly an intersection there in terms of teachers influencing me. Of course, a lot of my teachers were Feldenkrais practitioners as well, who were very influential. I'm trying to think how to answer your question in a useful way. One thing that I've really been involved in for the last at least 15 years was the work of the emotional body. I don't know if you've heard of that, but Laura Bond is one of the speakers on the summit also. And I met her almost 20 years ago, and she is a drama professor who also had been studying something called the ALBA method. And the ALBA method is another somatic approach to studying body language that was developed by a team of Chilean scientists who were looking at the neurophysiology of the emotions. And she went on from the ALBA method to develop the emotional body method, which kind of is an amalgam at this point of different somatic approaches like the Feldenkrais method and different restorative techniques with the principles of the ALBA method. And what I really appreciate about that is that, again, it takes the nuances of facial expression, breath, and posture, and teaches people how to be able to regulate these actual movements in the body in order to understand what Susanna Block, the Chilean scientist, called emotional effector patterns. So it's just a fascinating work. And again, it's just another thing in my toolbox that I've grabbed onto, that I really appreciate. And that, again, I found so many Feldenkrais lessons that definitely relate to these basic emotions, these basic emotional effector patterns, and have integrated that into my teaching as well. So that's been a big lesson. I mean, when I was in the theater, I had some great teachers in the theater that I'll never forget. So when you've lived as long as I have, you've had a lot of teachers. I don't want to bore everybody with the list.
Wow. I would love to have an experience with you. And whether you might want to just talk about this, or this might be part of your experience, but I want to know more about how you got your face to be so alive. I know it, you said it was through your acting training, but might there be something that helps us become more aware of our emotional life through the posture, but also through the facial expression?
Okay, well, I can't answer the first question because I have a feeling that my face has always done this. I have a feeling that that's kind of what, sort of like, that's who I was. And so that's why I became a mime, I don't know, but I don't have any videos of myself.
You're so good at it. I mean, that little difference between anger and contempt was so clear.
Well, that was as a result of the emotional body training. To be able to be facile, to be able to pendulate, as they call it, between different expressions is a process that does require some training. Now, when I was an actor and I would be in my emotional state, those changes would happen on my face spontaneously, but I didn't have control over it. I didn't have choice. Again, it comes back to choice. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because I was going back and forth with, how I wanted to share a practice with people. And I chose something that has something to do with the relationship of our posture, our emotions, the position of the head, and then just the nuance of facial expression, which, it's just coincidental that you're asking that. It wasn't in the description, the facial expression part. I just want you all to know. So and this is something you can all try. It's done, you can either do it in a chair. You might be able to do it if your desk or table is high enough. You want to be in a position where you could actually lean on your arms. So I'm going to do it in a chair. So you can see that I have the chair backwards. When Feldenkrais taught this lesson, in the transcripts, it said, sit cowboy style on your chair, which I thought was so cute. So you're sitting in your chair like this so that you can rest your arms, because we're going to be looking at the trunk, right? As I was saying to you earlier, there's so much research out now about what happens when our posture rounds and declines and the head gets heavy. There's not often a lot of talk about what happens when we're forward. There's an attitude a lot of times, in fact, those of us who, grew up before the 70s, that good posture meant chest out, shoulders back, right? And what that created, of course, was a lot of tension in the lumbar spine and sometimes some very frozen attitudes. But what we don't realize is these subtle shifts that we go through that we're not aware of, and that we all have a repertoire of different expressions that we just move from one to the other. Both Feldenkrais and Gurdjieff said that we just move from one to another of our habitual postures, and we don't see the nuances in between. So for this little practice, I want you first to feel how by leaning on the chair, you're able to have a little bit of a straighter spine than if you were sitting and leaning back, right? And then if you just let your pelvis roll back a little bit, you can feel how your back starts to round, right? And then come back. So you're just moving your pelvis and you're feeling how your back starts to round. And because your arms are in place, you can feel your whole back beginning to round. And you might begin to feel like your head wants to go down. This is a very natural movement, right? And so if you do that and you just hang there for a few moments with your head down, you can begin to start to experience a little bit of that contemplative quality, right? Where I'm thinking, or I'm pondering, or I'm looking at my cell phone. And then from here, you're just going to begin doing a simple movement of letting your chin reach downward towards your hands and return. And let your chin reach downward towards your hands and return. And now come on back all the way up. And now this time you're going to initiate with that movement and see what it does to your back. So you lower your head and reach your chin downward, and notice that your back kind of instinctively wants to round, and then bring yourself back up, and then lower your head and bring your chin forward, and see if as you bring your chin forward, whether your pelvis even wants to go back a little bit more. So you're just feeling this movement. And then come on back up. And now, can you turn your face to the right? Don't take it to its maximum or anything like that. But think of that movement that you just did with your chin, and let your chin go forward here. And notice if the rest of you might want to go a little bit to the left, or a little bit to the left and back as your chin goes forward. So we're looking at a repertoire of different ways that we use our head in relationship to our spine. And then come back. And try the same thing to your left, and just notice, does it feel a little different when you go to your left? Maybe your back doesn't want to move as much, or your chin doesn't go as far. And then come back again. And now what happens if you bring your chin backward and return? Does your back want to round? Does your back want to stretch out, stretch forward? What happens if you go back and you round your back? It's a little bit of work, but feel what that does, and then come back. and bring the chin back and round yourself back. So don't lower your head here. Instead, think that your head is going back towards the back wall. So you're kind of getting a double chin, and feel how that rounds your shoulders if you let it keep going backwards, and then come back. And now what happens if your chin goes backward, but you let your shoulders go back and come back, and you come back again and come back. So now let's just add the nuance of facial expression to all the things that you just did. So dropping your head, letting your chin go forward, let your back round, and now turn down the corners of your mouth and turn down the corners of your eyes. Notice your breath. And then come back up. Turn your head to the side. Let your chin go forward and narrow your eyes. Bring your teeth forward so that your teeth are meeting each other. And come back. Bring your head backwards from the side and raise your eyebrows. And come back. Let your head go backwards and open your eyes as wide as you possibly can. Maybe let your eyes go a little bit left and right. And come back. And then just take a moment after doing all that and just notice how you're sitting right now. What you feel in your face, in your posture. So by exploring different patterns, and we just scratched the surface here of how your head, your neck, and your spine relate to your face. And we could do like 1,000 different ones of these. You know, there's the one where you bring your head forward, narrow your eyes, bring your teeth together. And which way is your back right now? Is it rounded or is it forward? And if you bring it forward, it changes a little bit. It's more aggressive. This is an implied threat. So you start putting all those pieces together, and at the same time, you're influencing your whole spine. Now, just to let everything go, circle your pelvis as if you were sitting on a clock and just let your head do whatever it wants. Yeah, this is the part that Martha really likes because it lets it all go. And come back. So that was just a taste. So that was taking a traditional Feldenkrais awareness through movement lesson that's actually called chin movements on a chair, and then adding the various isolations that one can use with the face. So sometimes when we do that, the first time that we do it, it feels robotic or bizarre or unfamiliar because we don't recognize ourselves. And then other times, you know, I've taught this lesson where afterwards somebody goes, yeah, I know that person, and I did not like seeing her in that way. You know, we recognize these moments in ourselves when we start to see these habitual attitudes that just go by so fast, right? Paul Ekman talks about micro expressions. Our faces are changing all the time, and we just don't even realize that it's happening. So when we start to break it down and study it, and then add the breath on top of it, it becomes really fascinating.
I would just love to share that it had all of those nuances for me as well. Places actually where I felt uncoordinated, which was kind of cool because, you know, I'm pretty trained as a dancer to feel coordinated, but, you know, could I equally furrow both brows? You know, these kind of slight muscular imbalances of the face became evident for me. But right away, also the emotional piece.
Right.
So thank you for that. And I want to share that some of the language harkens to what we do in the Laban work in terms of spatial. You know, I'm going to the back and high versus the back and low. And so, of course, we visited the emotional place, but then to add that with the face as well, which I've done with eye exercises, but to really add it to the mouth, maybe do one eye and not the other. I can see that you'd have a lifetime of study here, but also for you as an actress and a mime, a kind of connecting of the dots of your prior knowledge with your current knowledge, and then being able to so eloquently share it with others is really a gift. So thank you for sharing it.
Well, thank you. I mean, and I've in other interviews I've talked about, for example, the idea of abducting the muscles of the face and adducting the muscles of the face, and that's in a Feldenkrais lesson. He has that exploration of bringing the muscles of the face out and in. And the first time I taught that lesson in an emotional body course, it was like a revelation from an anatomical perspective for the people who were learning about these different emotions that come in the face. So.
And thank you for bringing up the rasa work as well. We've been playing with smells and you know how different tastes and smells cause different reactions in the face.
Oh, that was one of the facial expressions, that when you have your head back like that, and then you wrinkle your nose, right? I mean, it's right away you feel it, right? And it's just using the movements of the chin and the spine and then adding the nose. So that was, thank you for reminding me of that.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, is there anything more you'd like to share that we didn't get to talk about, or might this be a moment to tell people how to reach you or what else you're doing these days?
Well, I mean, they can find everything on my website. I have a big website, and it's my name, and as far as I know, I'm the only Lavinia Plonka in the world, so I'm easy to find. And I encourage you, there's a lot of resources there. And thank you, Martha. It's a delight to be able to share my work in this way.
Well, thank you. And I thank the shift actually for bringing the somatic world together in this way and bringing us together.